The small cabin stood alone at the edge of Clearwater Valley, surrounded by tall pine trees that whispered secrets when the wind blew through their branches. Morning fog rolled across the meadow, touching everything with tiny drops of water that sparkled when the sun finally broke through. This was home to a girl the townsfolk simply called the Orphan. Rose had lived alone in the cabin for almost 2 years now, ever since the fever took both her parents within days of each other. At 16, she was thin but strong, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes that seemed older than her years. The cabin had been built by her father's hands, every log, every nail placed with care. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Most days followed the same quiet pattern. Rose woke before sunrise, kindled the fire, and prepared a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush or whatever she had managed to preserve from her garden. This morning was no different as she pulled her worn shawl tightly around her shoulders against the autumn chill and stepped outside to fetch water from the nearby spring. Another day, she whispered to herself, her breath making little clouds in the cold air. She didn't mind talking to herself anymore. Sometimes her own voice was the only human sound she heard for days. The path to town stretched 3 miles through woods and open fields. Rose made the journey only when necessary, usually twice a month to trade what she could. Handmade soaps from animal fat and herbs, tinctures for common ailments, and occasionally extra vegetables from her garden. Today was trading day. She gathered her items carefully in a basket lined with a faded cloth that had once been her mother's best dress. 6 jars of honey from her beehives, several packets of dried herbs tied with string, and 3 bars of soap scented with wild lavender. It wasn't much, but Mr. Dawson at the general store would trade them for flour, salt, and maybe even a bit of sugar if she was lucky. The walk to town always made her think. Rose remembered how her mother had taught her about the plants that grew wild in these mountains. Which ones healed burns, which ones soothed coughs, which ones should never be touched. Those lessons kept her alive now. That orphan girl knows things most folks don't, people would whisper when she entered the general store. Lives all alone out there talking to plants like they was people. The whispers didn't bother Rose anymore. She knew what they really meant. That she was strange, perhaps dangerous, too much like the native people who had lived in these mountains long before the settlers arrived. The knowledge her mother had passed down, some of it learned from a kind Shoshone woman years ago, made the townsfolk uncomfortable. As she walked, Rose spotted a patch of yarrow growing beside the path. She knelt to gather some of the feathery leaves, adding them to her basket. "For cuts and fever," she murmured, repeating her mother's words. These simple rituals kept her parents' memory alive. The town of Clearwater appeared ahead, a cluster of wooden buildings with smoke rising from stone chimneys. It wasn't much. A general store, a blacksmith, a small church, and about 20 homes spread along the single dirt road. Most people made their living by farming the fertile valley land or working for the lumber company that had set up camp 5 miles east. The bell above the door to Dawson's general store jingled as Rose stepped inside. The familiar smells of coffee, tobacco, and leather greeted her. 3 women stood near the fabric bolts, their conversation dropping to whispers when they noticed her. Mr. Dawson, a round man with a gray beard, looked up from his ledger. "Morning, Miss Rose," he said with a nod. He was one of the few who used her actual name instead of just calling her the Orphan. "Good morning, Mr. Dawson," she replied, approaching the counter with her basket. "I've brought some things to trade." While Mr. Dawson examined her goods, the bell jingled again. Sheriff Miller entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. He was a tall man with a weathered face and eyes that missed nothing. "Morning, Thomas," he said to Mr. Dawson, then nodded to Rose. "Miss?" Rose kept her eyes down, arranging her items on the counter. The sheriff made her nervous, though he'd never been unkind to her. "Heard there was trouble with some Indians up north," one of the women said loudly, clearly wanting the sheriff to hear. "Stole some horses from the Henderson place." "Now, Mrs. Cooper, we don't know if it was Indians," Sheriff Miller replied patiently. "Could have been anyone. Who else would it be?" Mrs. Cooper insisted. "Those Shoshone have been getting bolder since the fort reduced their patrols." Rose listened silently as she completed her trade with Mr. Dawson. The talk of the Shoshone always made her uncomfortable. Her mother had spoken of them with respect, not fear. "Best head home before dark, Miss Rose," Mr. Dawson said quietly as he handed her the items she'd traded for. "Weather's changing. Might snow early this year." Rose thanked him and tucked her goods into her basket. As she turned to leave, Sheriff Miller touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Would you like an escort back to your cabin, miss? These are uncertain times." "Thank you, Sheriff, but I'll be fine," Rose replied. "I know the way well." Outside, the sky had darkened with heavy clouds. Rose hurried her pace, wanting to reach home before the rain started. The whispers about the Shoshone had unsettled her, not because she feared them, but because she feared for them. The settlers were growing more numerous, taking more land, cutting more trees. Conflict seemed inevitable. The first drops of rain fell as Rose reached the halfway point home. By the time her cabin came into view, she was soaked through and shivering. She hurried inside, setting her basket on the table and quickly changing into dry clothes. As evening fell, Rose sat by her fire, listening to the rain drumming on the roof. She opened her mother's old journal, tracing the familiar handwriting with her fingertip. The pages were filled with drawings of plants, recipes for medicines, and stories, some from the old country, some learned from the Shoshone. One entry always drew her attention. "The people of these mountains know more about living with the land than we ever will. Margaret Howling Wolf taught me that we heal best when we remember we are part of the world, not masters of it." Rose closed the journal and added another log to the fire. Tomorrow she would need to check her traps and gather more firewood. Winter was coming early this year. She could feel it in her bones. She would need to be prepared. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Rose dreamed of her mother walking with a tall Shoshone woman, both of them gathering plants and laughing together. In the dream, they turned and beckoned to her, but when she tried to follow, a river suddenly appeared between them, its waters rushing too fast to cross. She woke before dawn, the dream still vivid in her mind. Something about it felt important, like a message she couldn't quite understand. Rose stoked the fire and began her day, unaware that very soon her solitary life would change forever. The routine that had sustained her since her parents' death would soon be broken. The river from her dreams would become real, and a choice would be made that couldn't be unmade. But for now, she was just a girl alone in a cabin, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, wondering what the new day might bring. 3 days after Rose's trip to town, the autumn sky cleared to a perfect blue. She woke early as usual, but instead of tending to her garden or mending clothes, she decided to gather herbs along the riverbank. The first frost would come soon, and she needed to stock up on medicinal plants that would help her through the winter. With a small knife in her pocket and a woven basket on her arm, Rose set off toward the Clearwater River. The forest path was dappled with golden light that broke through the canopy of pine and oak trees. Fallen leaves crunched beneath her worn boots as she walked, breathing in the earthy scent of the woods. Juniper for coughs, she reminded herself, spotting the small blue berries on a bush, willow bark for pain, elderberry for fever. The words had become a kind of prayer over the years, a connection to her mother's teachings. The river came into view, its clear water rushing over smooth stones. In spring it swelled dangerously with snowmelt from the mountains, but now in autumn, it had calmed to a steady flow that sang rather than roared. Rose knelt on the bank and began to cut sprigs of late-blooming mint. As she worked her way along the riverbank, the sound of the water nearly drowned out another sound, a soft cry that might have been a wounded animal. Rose paused, listening. There it was again, more clearly now, a human voice. Following the sound, she rounded a bend in the river and stopped short. In the middle of the river, balancing precariously on slippery stones, stood a girl about her own age. She wore a deerskin dress decorated with colorful beadwork and had long black hair tied with leather strips. Even from a distance, Rose could see that she was Shoshone, and that she was hurt. The girl was trying to cross the river, but her right leg dragged awkwardly and blood stained the water around her feet. Without hesitation, Rose dropped her basket and waded into the cold water. The current pushed against her skirts, but she kept her footing on the slick stones. "I'm coming to help," she called, though she wasn't sure if the girl would understand her words. The Shoshone girl looked up, startled. For a moment, fear flashed across her face, and Rose realized how she must appear, a white settler approaching her while she was wounded and vulnerable. Rose slowed her movements and held out her empty hands. "I won't hurt you," she said softly, taking another careful step. "Your leg, you're bleeding." The girl hesitated, then nodded slowly, wincing as she tried to put weight on her injured leg. Rose reached her side and gently placed an arm around her waist for support. "Lean on me," Rose said, guiding the girl's arm across her shoulders. Together they made their way slowly across the river, the cold water numbing their feet as they navigated from stone to stone. Once they reached the bank, Rose helped the girl sit on a fallen log. The cut on her leg was deep, a jagged gash that ran from knee to ankle. "What happened?" Rose asked, examining the wound. The girl touched her leg and then made a motion like slipping and falling. "Rocks," she said in heavily accented English. "Sharp." Rose nodded in understanding. "My name is Rose," she said, pointing to herself. The girl placed a hand on her chest. "Lila," she replied. "Lila," Rose repeated. "I can help with your leg, but we need to go to my cabin. It's not far." Lila glanced nervously in the direction Rose had pointed, then looked back over her shoulder toward the mountains where her people's camp must be. "Father," she said, making a gesture that Rose interpreted as someone important. Looking. Rose understood. Lila's people would be searching for her. But the wound needed cleaning and stitching soon, or it might fester. "We'll tell them where you are," Rose promised, "after I help your leg." After a moment's consideration, Lila nodded, and with Rose's support, they began the slow journey to the cabin. The going was difficult. Every step caused Lila pain, though she barely made a sound. By the time they reached the clearing where Rose's cabin stood, both girls were exhausted. Inside, Rose helped Lila to the small bed and quickly set about gathering what she needed: clean cloths, her mother's bone needle and sinew thread, honey, and a mixture of herbs she kept ready for wounds. She heated water over the fire and gently washed the dirt from Lila's cut. "This will hurt," Rose warned, showing Lila the needle. "But it will help." Lila nodded stoically, gripping the edge of the bed as Rose began to stitch the wound. Despite the pain, she remained mostly silent, only letting out small gasps when the needle pierced particularly tender flesh. As Rose worked, she began to talk softly, more to distract Lila from the pain than anything else. She told her about the cabin, about her parents, about the herbs she was using on the wound. Lila listened, occasionally responding with a word or two of English or a gesture. "You alone?" Lila asked as Rose tied off the final stitch and began applying a honey and herb poultice to the wound. "Yes," Rose answered. "My mother and father died. Sickness." She mimicked coughing and fever. Lila's dark eyes softened with understanding. She touched her own chest. "My mother also." She made a gesture like something flowing away. River took. The shared experience of loss crossed the boundary of their different worlds. Rose wrapped Lila's leg in clean cloth and helped her to sit more comfortably. "Hungry?" Rose asked, and Lila nodded. While a pot of rabbit stew warmed over the fire, Rose found a piece of charcoal and a scrap of leather. She drew a simple map, showing the river, her cabin, and the town of Clearwater. She pointed to the blank area beyond the river. "Your people, where?" Lila studied the map, then took the charcoal and marked a spot in the foothills east of the river. She drew several small triangles to represent teepees. "How many days were you walking?" Rose asked, making a walking motion with her fingers. Lila held up 2 fingers, then pointed to the sun and made it rise and set twice. 2 days, Rose murmured. "You were lost for 2 days. As they ate the stew, Rose learned more about what had happened. Through broken English and gestures, Lila explained that she had been gathering roots with several women from her tribe. When a sudden storm separated them, she had tried to find her way back but became disoriented in the unfamiliar terrain. Her fall happened when she tried to cross the river at a point where the current was too strong. "Father is chief," Lila explained, sitting up straighter with pride. "Many warriors look for me." Rose nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. If Lila was the daughter of a chief, her disappearance would cause great concern among her people. They might even suspect that settlers had taken her. "Tomorrow," Rose said, pointing to the rising sun she'd drawn on the map, "I will help you go home." She traced a path from the cabin to the marked teepees. Lila nodded gratefully, but her eyes were growing heavy. The day's events and the pain of her wound had exhausted her. Rose helped her lie down more comfortably on the bed, insisting on taking a blanket for herself to sleep near the fire. As darkness fell outside, Rose thought about what helping Lila might mean. The townsfolk already viewed her with suspicion. If they knew she had helped a Shoshone girl, the daughter of a chief no less, they might turn against her completely. But looking at Lila, now sleeping peacefully despite her injury, Rose knew she had made the right choice. That night, Rose dreamed again of the river. But this time, instead of being unable to cross, she found herself helping someone through the rushing waters. When she woke before dawn, she understood that the dream had been a sign. Whatever happened next, there would be no turning back. Outside, an owl called 3 times from a nearby tree, a sound her mother had always said meant change was coming. Rose looked at Lila's sleeping form and whispered, "I think you're the change." Morning light filtered through the cabin windows as Rose stoked the fire. She had slept little, her mind busy with plans for the journey ahead. Lila still slept on the small bed, her breathing deep and even. Rose moved quietly, preparing a simple breakfast of cornbread and the last of the rabbit stew. The smell of food woke Lila, who pushed herself up on her elbows, wincing slightly as she moved her injured leg. "How do you feel?" Rose asked, bringing a cup of willow bark tea to help with the pain. Lila tested her leg carefully, stretching it out before her. "Better," she said with a small smile. "Your medicine good?" Rose checked the wound, pleased to see no signs of infection. The stitches held firm, though the area remained swollen and tender. "We should wait one more day before traveling," she suggested, making walking motions with her fingers, then shaking her head. "Tomorrow better." Disappointment flashed across Lila's face, but she nodded in understanding. "Father worry," she said, then made a sweeping gesture with her arm. "Warriors look everywhere." "I know," Rose replied gently. "But if we leave today, your leg might start bleeding again. One day will help you get stronger." As they ate breakfast, Rose realized this was the first time in nearly 2 years she'd shared a meal with anyone. The simple act of passing the cornbread, of watching someone else's face across the table, made her aware of how lonely she'd been. After eating, Rose showed Lila her garden and the herbs drying from the rafters. Despite their limited shared language, they found ways to communicate. Lila recognized many of the plants and showed Rose how her people use them differently. When Rose pointed to a bunch of sage hanging near the fireplace, Lila smiled and mimicked burning it, then waved the smoke toward her face. "Cleansing," she explained. "For spirit," Rose nodded. "My mother did that too. She learned from a Shoshone woman." Lila's eyes widened with interest. "Your mother knew my people?" "Yes," Rose said, retrieving her mother's journal. She showed Lila the careful drawings of plants, the notes in her mother's handwriting. "A woman named Margaret Howling Wolf taught her." Lila traced the name with her finger, her expression thoughtful. "Howling Wolf is my father's cousin's family," she said slowly, searching for the right words. "Old medicine woman." The connection surprised Rose. It seemed impossible that of all the Shoshone people in these mountains, she had helped someone connected to the very woman who had taught her mother. Yet perhaps it wasn't chance at all, but something her mother might have called the way of things coming full circle. Throughout the day, Rose and Lila continued to share knowledge. Lila showed Rose how to weave a small section of basket in the Shoshone style, her nimble fingers guiding Rose's. In turn, Rose taught Lila a simple song her mother used to sing while gathering herbs. By afternoon, Lila could put more weight on her injured leg, though she still needed to rest frequently. They sat in the doorway of the cabin, soaking in the autumn sunlight, when Rose noticed a hawk circling overhead. "In town, people say bad things about your people," Rose said hesitantly. "They're afraid." Lila watched the hawk for a moment before responding. "My people also afraid. White settlers take more land each season, cut trees, kill game." She gestured toward the distant mountains. "Soon nowhere for us to go." "Has there been fighting?" Rose asked. "Some. Not my father's wish." Lila's face grew serious. "He says fight only brings more soldiers, more guns." She made a sweeping motion with her arm. "All Shoshone gone then." Rose understood. The sheriff's words in town, the rumors of stolen horses, the increasing tension, it all pointed to a conflict that seemed impossible to avoid. "What will happen?" she asked. Lila shook her head. "Old ones say big change coming. Like great storm." She pointed to her heart. "Some listen to anger. Some listen to wisdom. My father tries to find path between." As evening approached, Rose helped Lila make a small pouch of herbs to take back to her people. They worked side by side, sorting leaves and roots, their hands moving in similar patterns despite being from such different worlds. "My mother would have liked you," Rose said quietly. Lila smiled. Your mother had good heart. Like you. That night, as they sat by the fire eating a simple supper of beans and dried apple slices, Lila began to hum a melody. The song was unlike anything Rose had heard before. It rose and fell like the wind through pine trees, like water over stones. What's that song about? Rose asked when Lila finished. About rivers, Lila replied, how they separate land but join people. She traced the path of an imaginary river with her finger. Rivers take away, rivers bring back. My mother sang this when I was small. Rose thought about that, how the river had nearly claimed Lila's life but had also brought them together. How her dream of the uncrossable river had changed to one where she helped someone across. Tomorrow we cross river together, Lila said. As if reading her thoughts before they slept, Rose packed what they would need for the journey. Food, water, herbs for Lila's leg, and a walking stick she had carved from a sturdy branch. She also tucked a small knife into her boot, not sure what they might encounter on their way to the Shoshone camp. Dawn arrived with a thin layer of frost covering the ground outside the cabin. Rose woke early and prepared a hearty breakfast to give them strength for the journey. Lila seemed stronger, able to walk across the cabin with only slight limping. Ready? Rose asked as they finished eating. Lila nodded, her face determined. Thank you, she said, gesturing around the cabin. For this. For helping. Anyone would have done the same, Rose replied, though she knew that wasn't true. Most settlers would have turned away, or worse, seen Lila as a threat. They set out as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. Rose had mapped their route carefully, avoiding the town and the lumber camp. They would follow the river upstream for several miles, then cut through the foothills toward the location Lila had marked. The going was slow at first. Lila needed to stop often to rest her leg, and the terrain grew rougher as they moved away from Rose's cabin. By midday, they had reached the spot where Rose had found Lila in the river. Here, Lila said, pointing to a treacherous section where sharp rocks jutted from the rushing water. Rose nodded. You're lucky you didn't. She didn't finish the sentence but made a gesture of being swept away. Not luck, Lila said seriously. My grandfather's spirit held me until you came. The simple faith with which she said this touched Rose deeply. Her mother had often spoken of spirits and unseen forces that guided people's paths. The settlers' church in town would have called such beliefs heathen, but to Rose they felt true in a way she couldn't explain. As they continued their journey, the forest grew denser. Rose noticed signs that others had passed this way recently. Broken twigs, disturbed leaves, a clear footprint in a patch of mud. Your people searching? She asked Lila, pointing to the tracks. Lila studied the signs and shook her head. Not Shoshone way of walking, she said with a frown. These men step heavy. Not hunters. Settlers then, Rose said quietly. Maybe from the lumber camp. They proceeded more cautiously after that, pausing often to listen to the forest sounds around them. The cheerful birdsong of morning had faded, and now the wood seemed watchful, holding its breath. We should hurry, Lila whispered. Not good to be found by such men. Rose nodded in agreement, helping Lila over a fallen log that blocked their path. They had just cleared the obstacle when a branch snapped loudly somewhere ahead of them. Both girls froze, eyes scanning the forest. Rose gently pulled Lila behind the trunk of a large pine tree, pressing a finger to her lips. They waited, barely breathing, as the sound of voices grew closer. Someone's been through here, a gruff male voice said. Tracks lead this way. Probably just deer, another voice replied. Deer don't wear boots, the first man said. And look here, something being dragged. Could be an injured Indian. Rose felt Lila tense beside her. The voices were coming closer. They needed to move, but where? The forest offered few hiding places, and with Lila's injured leg, they couldn't outrun the men. Suddenly, Rose remembered something her father had once shown her. A small cave formed by fallen rocks not far from where they stood. It had been a bear den once, but the bear was long gone. This way, she whispered to Lila, pointing, quietly. Moving as silently as shadows, Rose guided Lila toward the hidden cave. Every snapping twig made them freeze, hearts pounding in their chests. Lila bit her lip against the pain of her injured leg, but made no sound. The voices of the men grew louder, then faded as they moved in a different direction. The cave entrance was nearly invisible, covered by fallen branches and overgrown with moss. Rose pushed aside the natural curtain and helped Lila inside. The space was small but deep enough to hide them both. They pressed themselves against the cool rock wall and waited. "You think they're looking for me?" Lila whispered after several minutes of silence. Rose nodded. "Maybe. Or just hunting." She didn't say what kind of hunting. They both knew she didn't mean deer. Outside, birds suddenly scattered from a nearby tree. Rose put a finger to her lips as heavy footsteps approached. "Nothing over here, Pete," a voice called, so close that both girls held their breath. "Waste of time. Whoever it was is long gone." "Chief won't like it," another voice replied. "He said to find any Indians off the reservation land. The company wants to start cutting trees in this section next week. Well, I ain't spending all day chasing ghosts. Let's head back to camp. Gotta be halfway to the mountains by now anyway." The footsteps moved away, but Rose and Lila remained hidden, counting heartbeats until they were sure it was safe. Finally, Rose peered out from their hiding place. The forest had returned to its normal state, birds singing, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. "They're gone," she whispered. Lila's face was grim as they emerged from the cave. "Those men work for lumber company?" Rose nodded. "They're clearing more land every month." She pointed toward the eastern ridge. "We should stay away from that direction. That's where their camp is." They adjusted their route, moving deeper into the forest where the underbrush grew thick and travel was more difficult. Though it slowed their progress, the dense vegetation offered better hiding places. By mid-afternoon, they reached a high point where they could see across the valley. "Look," Rose said, pointing. In the distance, thin columns of smoke rose from what must be the Shoshone camp. Lila's face brightened at the sight. "My people," she said, her voice filled with longing. "We reach before dark." The remaining journey took them down from the ridge and through a meadow of tall grass. Lila moved with more confidence now, recognizing landmarks. Despite her injured leg, her pace quickened. "This path," she explained, indicating a narrow trail nearly hidden in the grass. "Hunting path. My father showed me when I was small." As they walked, Lila told Rose about her life with the Shoshone. She spoke of winters spent in sheltered valleys, of summers following game into the high mountains. She described festivals where her people danced and sang, ceremonies to honor the changing seasons. "Every spring, we thank Creator for new life," she said, gesturing to the world around them. "Every fall, we prepare for sleep time of earth." Rose listened, fascinated by how different yet somehow familiar Lila's life seemed. Her own mother had followed the seasons too, planting by the phases of the moon, harvesting herbs when they held the most power. "Your mother understood our ways," Lila said, as if reading her thoughts. Not many white people listened to land. The sun had begun its descent when they reached the edge of a small stream. Lila stopped, kneeling to drink. As Rose joined her, Lila suddenly gripped her arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Listen." At first, Rose heard nothing unusual, just the babbling of the stream and the rustle of leaves. Then she caught it, the soft rhythm of a drum carried on the breeze. Lila smiled. "My people call to spirits at sunset. We are close." They crossed the stream carefully, Lila wincing as the cold water touched her wound. On the other side, she paused to adjust the wrapping Rose had placed around her leg that morning. "What will your father think?" Rose asked suddenly. Lila looked up, her dark eyes serious. "My father is wise man. He knows not all white settlers wish us harm." She stood, testing her weight on the injured leg. "He will be grateful." But Rose wasn't so sure. After all that had happened between the settlers and the Shoshone, would any white person be welcome in their camp? She thought of turning back, of returning to her cabin alone. But something told her she needed to see this through. They followed the sound of drums moving through a grove of aspen trees whose leaves had turned golden with the season. As they neared the camp, Lila began to call out in her own language, words Rose couldn't understand but recognized as an announcement of their arrival. The drumming stopped. For a moment there was complete silence. Then shouts erupted from beyond the trees and the sound of running feet approached. "My people come," Lila said, her face glowing with joy. Rose stepped slightly behind Lila, suddenly conscious of being an outsider. Through the trees she glimpsed movement, people running toward them, their colorful clothing bright against the forest backdrop. The first to reach them was an older man with long gray-streaked hair and a face lined with both wisdom and worry. At the sight of Lila, his stern expression melted into profound relief. "Father," Lila called, limping forward to meet him. The chief embraced his daughter, speaking rapid words in their language. Over his shoulder, Lila motioned for Rose to come closer. "This is my friend," Lila said in English, reaching back to take Rose's hand. "She saved me, fixed my leg, brought me home." The chief released his daughter and turned to Rose. His dark eyes studied her face for a long moment. Rose felt the weight of his gaze, not hostile, but measuring, considering. "You helped my daughter cross the river," he said in surprisingly clear English. Rose nodded, unsure what else to say. "I am Chief Juanita," he continued. "My daughter is precious to our people. To me." He placed his hand over his heart. "I give thanks for what you have done." More people had gathered around them now, women, children, and several warriors who stood watchfully at the edge of the group. Rose felt their curious stares but tried to focus only on the chief. "Anyone would have helped," she said. The chief shook his head. "No, not anyone." He gestured toward the distant town. "Many would turn away, or worse." He studied her face again. "You are the orphan girl who lives alone by the western woods." Rose was startled that he knew of her. "Yes, your mother learned our medicine ways," he said. "From Howling Wolf, who was my father's cousin." So Lila had been right about the connection. "My mother respected your people's wisdom," Rose replied. "She taught me what she learned." Chief Juanita nodded, then turned to speak to his people in their language. A murmur went through the crowd. An elderly woman stepped forward, her face as wrinkled as dried apple skin, her eyes bright and alert despite her age. "This is Singing Bird," Lila explained. "Our medicine woman." Singing Bird approached Rose slowly, looking her up and down. Then she reached out and took Rose's hands in her own, turning them over to examine her palms. She spoke in the Shoshone language, her voice like dry leaves rustling. "She says your hands know how to heal," Lila translated. "Like your mother before you." Singing Bird released Rose's hands and spoke again, this time at length. As she talked, the expressions of those listening grew serious. "What is she saying?" Rose asked when the old woman finished. Lila hesitated. "She says trouble comes. Soldiers and settlers push closer to our hunting grounds. Soon there will be fighting unless wise hearts find another way." She looked at Rose intently. "She says you crossed the river for a reason. That some spirits guided your steps to find me." Rose wasn't sure how to respond. She didn't fully understand such beliefs, yet something about the old woman's words resonated with her dream of the uncrossable river. Chief Juanita spoke again. "You will stay with us tonight. Tomorrow we will talk more." He gestured toward the camp. "Come, you are welcome at our fire." As they walked toward the Shoshone camp, Lila limping slightly beside her, Rose felt as though she had crossed more than just a physical river. She had stepped into a world different from her own, yet somehow connected to it, like the river itself, dividing yet joining the land on either side. The camp opened before them, teepees arranged in a circle, smoke rising from cooking fires, children pausing in their play to stare at the white girl in their midst. Some of the warriors still watched her with suspicion, but others nodded respectfully as she passed. "You are first white person to enter our camp in many seasons," Lila told her quietly. "This is important day." Rose understood then that her simple act of helping an injured girl might have consequences far beyond what she could imagine. As the sun set behind the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, she wondered what tomorrow would bring.